How's it going, everyone? Euler Gonzalez here again. Today we're going to discuss about is this thing called React Server Component, which is now the foundation of how this next 13, 14, and all other versions now are based upon. And not only that is to understand is that why do we actually need to have these things called Next? What is the problem that it solves? Be able to describe that, and then get a more more practical approach of how can we now set up everything here. So this is one of the things that I really love about taking notes from this course made by Scott Moss. Shout out to Scott Moss. Now he is the current CEO and co-founder of Superfilter AI. He previously worked at Netflix as a software engineering, and also before that as the helicopter maintainers in San Francisco Bay Area. So yeah, he got a very interesting background. So now he dedicated most of his time to actually understand how this technology works, how you can explain that in plain terms, because he daily is now taking all of this tech speak, right? So you can think of this as pretty much like Shark Tank, right? Where he takes technical pitch all day long, and AI pitch and dev tools, and things like that. So what it does is writing curriculums, writing codes. I think this is one of the important things, not only for writing, but also to communicate, to understand how this code it is, and why we're writing the thing that we do. And now, well, of course, keeping his technical skills sharp, because it helps them, and it's also helped me to keep up to date with these new founder pitches, right? So now more about the Next.js course, which is to understand now why Next.js exists, what is the problem that it tried to solve, a little bit of history on how do we get here, and then understand now the fundamentals of this Next.js 13 and so on, that is React Server Component. And what is the subtle things we also look at how can we actually create our own server to simulate now the way of these things that we're going to talk about that, right? So a little bit of history here. After all, so Facebook now create React back in 2018, and then they made up open source in 2013, and the pattern, so the pattern here is that most of these top tech companies, at some point, their engineers are facing problems that nobody else are doing, and because of that, they need to find a way, a system, some sort of process to actually make their life much more easy to solve the problem that they need to solve. So because of that, so Facebook back in those days, and those software developers, they come up with this idea of React as a way to now focusing on creating these components by wrapping the DOM and all of its property and methods, follow along with some of additional methods that allow them, or that allow us as the developers to now compose all of this small user interface, small HTML tags or custom tags that we want to define in a way that anytime we need to actually render those elements on the server and then send back to the client based on an initial request made by the user to say, hey, I want you to visit to Netflix, Google, Pizza Hut, you name it, right? It sends that request, so they're gonna pass through. I'm gonna be a little bit of technical, but just to describe what are the different components involved. So anytime the user wants to navigate to one of these URLs, say Facebook, all right, so that informations pass through the OC model, which is now the way of how different computer systems and architecture can exchange information, all right? And it is made of 7 layers. So you have now the application. That this is where now the application and this is the user line and the application that is now communicate to the network service, to the OS, and then the underlying physical card. So you have now the application, then you have the presentation, which verify is the format in which this information is going to be sent. This is very important to describe this in terms of the Cloudflare OC model here. As you can see here, come on. The presentation layer is ensure that the data is in a usable format, and this is where the data is encrypted. Okay, so then you have now the season layer. This is where now the TCP connections and this is when the connections and seasons are managed. So seasons and ports, and then you have now the transport layer, where this is indicated that which transmission protocol are we gonna use, whether it's UDP or TCP, is connection based or connectionless, right? And this is just to mention the most popular one. Then you have now the network layer to say, hey, what is the physical path that this message will take? And that is when you have now this IP address, and then the data link, which defines the format, or in this case, this is now the way of how this is the way, or this is the format. So defines the format of data on the network. Is like how this data is going to be sent over. You have a huge gigantic message, and you want to split that into several chunks to be sent over through that. So what will be the format of data in the network? And then you have now the physical layer, right? The physical layer is like, say, hey, after I receive all of this information, right? Now I know what I have to do. I have all of the instructions necessary to actually transmit that over the cable. So that's what is going on every time you actually navigate to a URL from your browser, and then that go out and hit the ISP servers, the internet service provider, and then now need to resolve to where you want to communicate. Okay, and this is through the DNS. So the DNS is this dictionary that contains the IP and the IP and the URL stream. All right, and then now it's sent back to the browser. The browser receives that. It may catch or not, depend if you want to do that. Most likely he want to catch that. And then now that the browser know when you need to send this information, when you need to send this request, before that, it needs to actually, because here we're using is HTTP, right? This TCP connection, all right? It needs to actually establish is something called as the three-way handshake. As a way to know, is like, hey, server, are you there? If you are, let's start to synchronize, right? This is known as the SYNAC sync, right? Or sorry, is SYNAC ACK, which is something that happens. SYNAC ACK, right? So it's a synchronization acknowledge, and then yeah, a synchronization acknowledge, and then the acknowledgement, right? And after that is when now it can happen here. So if you, for example, are using now a secure channel, all right, whether it is HTTP or you are now using some encryption, you use now the TLS for that, which is now adding is a new handshake. This is say, hey, which encryption protocol are we going to use? Is the symmetric encryption, which means is that hey, both of us has public key, right? Whether it is AS, I think I get this, AS, AAS. This is for yeah, because right now I want to take a look at the front-end system design. Okay. DOM API here, especially on the network layer, like that. This is the TCP handshake. All right. The TLS negotiation for secure connection. This is say, hey, we're gonna do this using some symmetric encryption, whether it's CHA-20 or AAS. Okay, so you have one key, one public key for that, or you say, hey, well, let's go with the asymmetric encryption, which is a private and public key. Hey, this public key is just for decrypt information, and private key is just for encrypted, right? Whether it is, hey, Diffie-Hellman algorithm or elliptic curve cryptography, Rivers-Shamir Edelman, right? Any of these algorithms that allows to generate these asymmetric encryptions, okay? Or it can be symmetric encryption, which is AS or CHA-20 or DAS, data encryption standard, which is something that you the security industry has moved on to a more so this DAS is now no longer being used, right? Has been considered insecure right from the start because of the feasibility of brute force attacks. That's one of the reasons why now it's most likely used is the AES, right? As an advanced encryption standard, like so. So, but in other words, but in any case, the idea here is that this is what happened here in this layer, which is another handshake or another negotiation that needs to happen. And as you can imagine, this thing is something that is slow, right? Because before you actually sending the request to the server to say, hey, I want you to get some information from you, or in this case, get some document and show that to the user, we need to do 4 requests. Jesus, that's to assume that before three-way handshake, TLS negotiation. Exactly. Then the TLS, which actually more than one request, okay, which is actually more than one request. In total, you're looking at more than 4 round trip before getting the actual HTML. The TCP handshake takes 3 steps, and the TLS handshake typically takes 2 round trips. So client is okay. So the client now here, exactly, sync act, okay, client hello, and then you need the certification to establish now the TLS connection, which is client hello, all right, client hello, server hello, client hello, server hello, exchange of a key and get the key. So you finally now can send the data. God damn it. So we're talking about here we're talking about here is like 1, 2, 3, 4 requests. So from the server perspective, from the client perspective, you need to make 4 requests before, for example, make a GET request. Exactly. First sync, second request, sync act. The TCP is completing. Now the client say a request. Okay, synac act. This is an 2-1, right? Then the client send is a TCL to establish is now the TLS connection with the third request by saying, hey, client hello, server responds with that. Now this is when on the 4 requests is when the clients so now the 4 requests is when the client exchange and finish the TLS encryption. And finally, you actually get the request from the HTML. So you need to perform, from the client perspective, 4 requests before even actually sending data. And this is one of the reasons why it made, of course, the network slow to fetch data. And because all of this happened quickly, all right, now there is this particular protocol on Google that say, hey, no, let's make use quick, which is UDP based, to actually only send, hey, initial hello, send the certifications, and finalize the data. So this is huge in terms of the amount of requests that you need to actually do that. But all of this is TCP-based connection versus quick, or in other words, UDP base, right? Connection based and connectionless. So in other words, all of this is just to describe what happened there, all right? And this is when we want to fetch some document from the server, and then now receive that here. What happened is during the server is now pre-rendering that element, is pre-rendering that document or rendering that document before sending that. So one of the main issues that is some of this, or the main issue that Next.js is aimed to solve, is all of these different rendering modes. So for example, you have like other libraries like Angular, which is actually robust in the sense of, hey, this is everything that you need to actually build these large scale applications. React was developed more for a Facebook needs, which is, hey, we need this small unit of HTML or content that we want to render and then send over that. And that is quite something interesting that has served up to this point. Yeah, that has served something. All right. Uh, and then you have other frameworks like Wiki and Vue, and each one of them actually is important to recognize that they solve a specific problem, right? And also that because with React application, we need to, for example, if we want to now navigating in our we provide navigation in our application, we need to rely on a library called is React router. Okay, and how now React router actually is just to show or hide a div anytime you actually go through or navigate to a particular page. And then you also need some ESLint to actually verify the correctness of your applications and the syntax, as well as the common pitfall that you might have, and also a linter to verify that you have everything in the proper formats and follow this particular guidelines. Prettier, that's actually is following this. And to give you much more predictability, you need to set up TypeScript as well. So you want is to now avoid some of the errors that happen at runtime, while also getting now a self-documented code. And one of the cool features for developers is this IntelliSense, is the auto completion features. And also, you need to find a way, if you're a big company, not to rely on some developers that is maintaining one particular library, let's say a router, in some sort of basement, and suddenly you're put your business asset at risk. So this is one of the trade-off of going and shopping in the open source when you need to rely your company assets to this single contributors or some random contributor out there, right? And this is when now Next, which formerly Sate, now say, all right, so let's make now first the infrastructure needed to build our application much more easy to go with, which is the value proposition of Next, and also is in these new versions, Next 13 and 14 and so on, is to now understand and apply the fundamentals of this React server component features. So here in React 13 is trying to solve these different rendering modes. There are other sorry. There are other frameworks out there that are actually trying to do that. For example, Vue 3 and Nox was known to provide this framework. And anytime you get into a framework, you are now tied or married to whatever that framework needs. So it doesn't fit to your needs. And this is something important to recognize, especially if you're building your applications, right? So I get it why there are some other things called like Alpine.js, right? Where it say, hey, you know what? Let's going to make this pretty much like a like jQuery, okay? If you want to actually update and provide some data here, where we're going to now define is this specific stuff that we can go with, right? So Alpine and Quick actually behave quite similar in terms of pretty much like, even though like Vue, where you say, hey, do you want to work with this? All right, just install this as a script, period. And then from there, go on. Become an Alpine master with our deep screencast and all that kind of stuff, third-party integration, and all of this. Support this project so it can keep getting better. Alpine UI components are awesome. I love that you can just copy and paste the basic integration of a component. If you want to go deeper, and professional video tutorial is right there to help you out, and all that kind of stuff. So I think this is get live access to this, right, and the community and all that kind of stuff. All right. There are other frameworks, for example, like Quick framework, okay, where you can now is pretty much try to do that. So you have now an example with this. Quick Dev. This is quite interesting. Actually, this was developed by the this was developed by the Angular developers, right? Dev, entry, server side, and all that kind of stuff. But in any case, so you got Quick. But in any case, the point of this is that each one of them are trying to do stuff to solve the particular problem, right? So you also have HTMLX, right? It's another one like this, where here it say, hey, you know what? You just import this, all right? And then you just started to work with this, right? Silver sponsor JetBrains, GitHub, Craft CMS, Butter CMS, Interesting, and all that kind of stuff. Your Ajax requests and boosting and history, but again, this is just to describe that at the end of the day, all of these frameworks, what they want to do is to try to make things more easy to work and look cooler and improve the rendering of the application. So because of that, right, in the case of React Server components or the foundations, because everything going forward is based on this foundation of the React Server component. So the problem is different renderings, apps, modes. So you have now single page components and server-side rendering. The single page component is something that happened everything on the server. So when the user now navigate to a particular URL, it wants to fetch the entire application here by saying, hey, first get me is the HTML, and inside of the HTML it contains now the JavaScript code, where initially show a loading screen while in the background hurry up everything else. So in the meantime, the user needs to wait for the entire page application to load, and then the page becomes visible and interactive. So this is something bad for SEO because especially for web crawlers that they need to see the context to actually rank them properly. And this is when you have things back in the old days like, hey, I want you to have now a and a server that detect who is making this request. If this request comes from a bot, of this bot or from a crawler, then you want to show now the pre-rendered HTML. If it's not, you want it to now show is a single page application, and this become quite a problem to solve, right? To manage, and well, it turns out that with the server-side rendering, which is pretty much what a server-side rendering happens in language like PHP, where you will have now a server here that on the initial page is gonna send you now is the initial render of the HTML document. The page is visible, but it's not interactive because it needs to actually, once it loads the content on the browser, the client can see that, and in the background is hurry up everything to load the JavaScript code. That code now is it is a client representation of your components, so it now sync with the client versions to provide now interactivity. This is part of the hybridization process, and again, the idea here is this is now how the rendering work in server-side application using React. Okay, so because of that, and also, for example, what happens when you have a form, right? So you don't load all the entire HTML, but now the user is waiting for the JavaScript content to be loaded, so your form is unresponsive, and that's not a good idea. So they come out here to actually solve this problem with something called the server render component, React server component. So unlike, this is pretty much like a server-side rendering here, but the thing here is that this component, it is pre-rendering. All right, unlike the traditional server-side rendering, now this server this React server component, the RSC, is now, unlike the server side, which is pre-rendered on the initial page, this is now rendering on any route that you have. So it also makes it easy for catching and for streaming this data. And I think this is the value proposition of this. We can also verify that with Cloud. So it is safe to assume that a React server component is unlike server-side rendering that pre-render or that renders a content on initial load. All right, React server component renders components per page, and renders components per page, allowing those pages to be cached and provide streaming capabilities. Exactly, allowing those pages to be cached, so renders a component per page with everything that they need, for example, data fetching, allowing those pages to be cached and provide streaming capabilities. Let me clarify some points about React Server Component and server-side rendering. And there's some misunderstanding in your statement. Okay, React Server Components and server-side rendering actually serve different purposes and can be used together. So server component execute entirely on the server and never ship to the client. Can access, this is server component. Execute entirely on the server and never ship to the client. Can access server-side resource directly, database files and systems, allowing moving data fetching to the server, and their output is serialized and sent to the client. Server-side rendering pre-render the HTML on the server for better initial load. The JavaScript bundle still downloads and Hydra takes the page. Exactly. This is now the Hydra take process, which is the entire content of the server-side rendering is now there. And then also is going to send something known as the client code, that when it's sent back to the client pre-render your HTML, the client show the content to the user, and in the background is calling this server, is calling this client code that is going to now get all of these component representations on the client side and then provide interactivity, which is what's happening here, So we're gonna take that component, we're gonna take that components, render it to the HTML, send the HTML to the browser, so it shows that instantly with no JavaScript. Then while in the background downloading the JavaScript code, which contains the client version of that component, and takes over without it. Exactly. And the client version of those components that is fetching from exactly. And in the background, download the JavaScript that contains the client version of that component that takes over will allow interactivity. So this swap happens so fast that you don't see it. And that's what it is. So it makes the initial page load faster and improve SEO, and happens once per request at runtime. The key difference is that React Server Component is about component architecture, where code execute. While server-side render is about the initial page load strategy. You can actually use both together. No, exactly. But when the code execute, and for catching and streaming, both React Server Component and server-side support catching, RSC enables more granular catching at a component level, and streaming is possible with both. RSC make it more natural since components can load independently. So in other words, exactly. So it is safe to assume that React Server Component renders components per page. Okay, so React Server Components renders component per page at the server. At the server, exactly. React Server Components render components or renders components at the server, therefore accessing data or accessing resources directly, okay, so it is safe to assume that React server components render component at the server, therefore accessing resource directly by moving the data fetching to the server. Exactly, by moving the data server to the server. Exactly, by moving the data fetching to the server. Exactly. By moving the data fetching to the server. Why is this? Well, because data fetching or synchronization with external system. Okay, why is this? Well, because data fetching or synchronization with external system servers in React happens at the client level we end up having exactly network duplication, network requests, network waterfall, okay, inability to catch data or to catch response and race conditions. But it's because of that. It's that network duplication, because now it's on the client side that it need to actually make this request again. The network waterfall is because of the components, all right? The catching issue, because catching is one of the most complex things in Java, in computer science, and the other is race conditions. By moving data fetching to the server, and the other is race condition here. Client side risk. No race conditions. Oh, race condition is for this observability. So even though the user final search was for reactive, they might see result for React. because the request finished last and wrote the correct result. And it is race condition. But this is the problem that actually is solving here. And this is the problem that it's solved here. This is the challenge here. This is the challenge here. So React Server components render component at the server, therefore accessing resource directly by moving the data fetching to the server. And why is this? Well, because data fetching or synchronization with external services, with external system servers, happens in React happens at the client level. So we end up having network duplications, network waterfalls, the inability to catch response, which can be quite tricky, and also race conditions. And also race condition. And also race condition. So now React 18 is aiming to solve this issue by introducing now this particular concept. And that's quite interesting. That's one of the value propositions of this. So the use case for this is data fetching that happens at the server, right? Not at the client. And for example, content from CMS, you can get that from the server while the component is rendering and send that back to the client without any JavaScript associated. If you need to have component with interactivity, only that component must be rendering on the client side. Exactly. And here's where you can do something they call progressive enhancement. And when we're choosing what to download and what to do at a specific time. Instead of downloading everything one time. Value proposition of server-side component. So instead of downloading everything at once, HTML and the JavaScript bundle like server-side rendering, React server component, okay, React server component says that. Say, let's just download the whole thing, the HTML, and when this need interaction, we're going to download progressively, and we can actually stream it. Next.js has taken that and built into the framework. This RSC, React Server Component, is an experimental feature that you can find in their docs. So for example, React Server Component, okay, or Server Component in React 18, because this is now has become stable, right? This has become stable. And this is interesting because it's like, no, only 19. What? What if you want to learn from previous, what? And then you got it. React 18, right? And there is a lot of applications that still using it React 16. To me, it's like, what? You are too old, bro. I mean, not old. You are incapable to move on. You are too slow to move on. That's what happened. You are too slow to move on. Client APIs and server API. And now it makes a lot of sense of why we have this. and as well as this hide rotate root. It makes completely sense. Servers are server APIs render to pipeable string, render to readable string, render to static markup, and render to string. Okay. Okay. So now that we grasp the technical aspect here, okay, that I think this is quite important, let's actually
question. But it is, as far as like what you get, it's pretty much the same thing.
Let's actually set up this, my friend.
Now that we're all experts on server components, let's talk about the number one feature.
So we are, of course, now an expert on server component.
In Next.js, and then we'll write some code, is basically the routing. So I have, some notes here that kind of talk about routing, but we can go over this. I'm just going to open my editor, and we're just going to start working on our app. So I think the first thing we want to do is, before we get in there and get busy with the routing, let's just get everything set up. That way we can start actually working on this app. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make it a repo here. Let me see. Actually, one of the best ways to get started is to use create React app. The problem with that, though, is that you just want to be locked into a certain version. I'm sorry, not create React app, create Next app. The problem with that, though, is that I want to be locked into a certain version with this course going forward to make sure it's backwards compatible. So just keeping that in mind, if you're following along, whatever version we download with create React app, that's the version you want to make sure you have going forward. Otherwise, future versions might break this course. But anyway, I'm just going to type npx. If you don't know what npx is, it actually comes installed with Node. It's basically a way for you to run global CLIs without having to download those CLIs. So npx and then create Next app.
So npx allow you to download all of these binary so without having you to install Node.
Way for you to run global CLIs without having to download those CLIs. So npx and then create. But anyway, I'm just going to type npx. If you don't know what npx is, it actually comes installed with Node. It's basically a way for you to run global CLIs without having to download those CLIs.
Exactly. So run global CLI without having to run those CLIs.
So npx and then create.
Run those global CLI without having to install those CLI.
Next app, like this.
Run those global CLI without having to install them. That's it.
I'm just going to say at latest, which is going to give me the latest. We'll see what version that resolves to, and that's the version you want to make sure you have. If you're taking this course after this recording, make sure you have this version. We'll talk about it. And then I can put an optional folder name here. I'll just say intro v3 app.
Okay, this is the current version that we're gonna use. That's right. Thanks to share that. Okay, I think I can guess no. Then we can just move on to and say, hey, intro Next.js here. You say this one. Let me actually remove in a recursive force way the intro here. Get out of here. So I'm using, so you can see what I'm doing. Really? Really? No, this is not. Go grab. No, what about this? No. And this. Really? And this one doesn't exist? Okay, that's quite interesting. Let me put this on top of that. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, let me actually move through that by saying make there, or in other words is cursor. Open up here cursor, blam, no, rectangle. Okay, please, you got it. Just gonna take this. Cursor, character, ESLink, index, Main.ts, packaging laser test. Where is it? Cursor character, yes, Oh, you didn't load it. Okay, no problem. What about now? There you got it. Yeah, you didn't load that back then. Okay, and here we are. Okay, cool. So here, that actually is not to create this with the proper version, that they say. So npnx is just a way to is the way how you tell now Node to install to run this CLI without having to install them, and then create Next app here. Here we're using is this a specific version and call this the intro version 3.
And then now it's going to give you this prompt of like different configurations you want to use. So asking you to use TypeScript, I'm going to say yes. I love TypeScript. ESLint for sure. Tailwind,
Yes.
Source directory. So by default, Next.js works on the root of this directory. If you want to put all that into a folder called source, you can do that. I'm going to say no.
All right. So yes, I love to work with TypeScript. ESLint for sure. Tailwind, yes. It means that by default now Next works in the root folders. If you put now source at your root folders, that's what it is. And in my case, no. App router.
Use the app router. We'll talk about the app router, but yes, definitely use the app router. Would you like to customize the default import aliases? Don't worry about that right now. I'd say no.
Would you like to customize the default import aliases? I don't want to worry about that. No. And here we can see all of the dependency that it's installing, that it needs to actually develop the web application, right? All of this is setting up the infrastructure needed for us. React, React DOM, Next, TypeScript, also the types for React Node and React DOM, Tailwind, PostCSS. For those who are not familiar with this, this allow us to use the latest CSS and the proposals. So the outer PostCSS is a very interesting library here. Oh, think of PostCSS like a Babel for. Oh, okay. Oh, right. So think of PostCSS like a Babel for JavaScript, right? Auto prefixer is actually for this nice little stuff that we need to add to each one of those browsers.
This is going to install it.
Is Tailwind kind of becoming like a standard of using?
I hate to say it, but yeah. And the reason I hate to say it is
Some inline styling.
yeah, I know. The reason I hate to say it is because I personally just don't like writing tons of CSS classes all in my components, and for the longest I just did not understand or like Tailwind. I didn't know why people use it. I'm like, I don't get it. Like I would just rather just use a component library. I don't know. That already has style components, and then just edit those styles with inline styling that I need. But I've gotten to this point where like I realized I was doing more editing of component libraries to fit the style that I need, and it was probably faster for me to start with components that didn't have the style and add the style that I needed. So then I found myself writing my own CSS, and then I was like, oh,
It's a JavaScript library that generates CSS dynamically. Mhm.
like, oh wait, this is really powerful. So that plus me learning about like headless components, which are components that have functionality but no styling associated with it, kind of solved my problem. It's like the functionality of these components that look like crap, and then just add intelligence to them, and it's great. So yeah, I would say it's pretty much the standard
Yes,
process.
components that actually
It's
look like crap.
obviously there's different types of stuff, there's different ways to set them, but if you like using CSS classes, it's basically free. So you just gotta learn Tailwind, right? But they do a good job of making sure the class names match the property names in CSS, so it's almost intuitive. So you kind of get the hang of it really quick. Let's just go check out what we got. So let's open this up in my VS Code editor. We got a lot of things going on there. Actually, let me see. Let's do this back.
Mm-hmm.
And now we open this. So we get a lot of things here, but the first thing I want to check out is just like everything that got installed. So we head to the package JSON, which if you don't know is just a file that keeps track of all of our dependencies in our node project. And we can take a look at the dependencies in the field here and see a few things. The most important one is that we see Next. So Next itself is a dependency in which we download, and you see that we resolved to 13.4.5. So if you are following along, you're watching this later, and you have troubles with any errors, it's probably because you did the latest command and got a different version. So what you can do, you can just say, instead of what we did, which was at latest, you can just do at Tailwind itself, and then because I'm the
Oh, but this is not looking at the development dependency here. Okay, which is this one. So we installed now the type for Node, React, and React DOMs. Makes sense. The auto prefixers, which is now allow us to prefix some vendor CSS that are needed. You can take a look more in detail about that. For example, the prefixers of show in the scroll bar at the right side, right? Or showing the scroll bar on at the bottom of the screen. So you can actually is, for example, when you need to target each one of those UI elements, you can go with, or if you need to some way to prefix that, it actually autocomplete you for that. The ESLink is, as I mentioned before, is the way of how you can now guarantee the correctness of your JavaScript applications by providing you also is some recommendations in your code, right? ESLink configuration for Next.js, because remember, at the end of the day, Next provides you now the infrastructure needed to build up your React components. So it come up with the router, the ESLint, the TypeScript, also here the post CSS, which is some of the, you can think of this as the Babel for CSS, where it allows you to use now uh, the latest features of CSS. Okay, you can kind of things like that.
TypeScript, I get TypeScript. We also get a few commands here. So we get a def command, which we'll be using to develop with locally.
Mm-hmm. Oh, it's for transforming CSS with JavaScript plugins. So it'll also help you with. Oh, okay, it's a transform. Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So it's, you can think of Babel like the. So you can think of post CSS like the Babel of JavaScript. That is, well, is not only allow you to use. Oh, okay. So allow you to use the next generation of CSS and provide automation task for build for bundling, for linting, bundling and minifying CSS. Exactly. Uh, and that's quite interesting. That's very, very interesting.
Gives us like fast refresh, hot reload, server to serve, all the really cool things. The build and start commands for production. This is where we'll build the actual app and then start it in production. You almost will never use this locally unless you're testing to see if it works in production. And then the link command does exactly what we think it does. It lints. So, and I'm going to ignore them lecture today. So it's like red squigglies give you anxiety. You're about to have a lot of anxiety today because I'm pretty much going to ignore it. And I'm going to ignore them lecture today. So it's like red squigglies give you anxiety. You're about to
The Rex quickly give you anxiety.
have a lot of anxiety today.
You have a lot of anxiety today.
I'm pretty much going to ignore it. So, yeah. And then, yeah, everything else is pretty standard. And you can see it also set up the configurations for a lot of these things. So it's set up the post CSS config. It's set up the tailwind config with our paths to our app already configured.
Exactly. Which is now with the Tailwind config say, hey, we are ready everything here now, which is post CSS config. Remember, this is like Babel for CSS, which allows you to use now the next generation of CSS, as well as bundling, minifications, and bundling and minification, right? Bundling, minification, and linting. And then you have another tailwind config, which is here you specify is like, hey, which are the file, where are your content gonna live? Where are this configuration folders gonna be live? Right? As well as what are the theme that you wanna go with? And also the TypeScript configuration here, as you can see, we're targeting now, this is what is going to be generated, the EX file, to actually make it very, very compatible with the vast majority of browsers out there. The library that we're going to use is the DOM. Hey, TypeScript, I want you to know by default recognizes the DOM iterable, as well as the next generation of JavaScript. Okay, allows you as true to say, hey, in some part, if you actually need to use only JavaScript, please allow me to. Skip link check is also some checking some of these type definitions. Strict true is say, hey, I want you to know enable this TypeScript check here. For consistency casing in file names, as the name suggests, is ensuring is the correct imports. No emit, disable emitting from a compilation. ES model interoperability. This is so you can now work with CommonJS and EX6 models for that. The model definition we're going to use is the EXNext. Model resolution is node. Resolve JSON model true, please. So anytime that I import a JSON file, please now resolve that. That's why we also might like to even indicate to TypeScript or to Next to say, hey, I want you to now is import some other files here. You can and I want you to detect that. GSX in this case is preserve. Incremental, enable incremental compilation. And then some other configuration here. For example, say, hey, I want you to exclude SDA checking for any of these folders. And I want you to include to the TypeScript configuration the Next.js TypeScript and any type file that you might find right below. Okay.
Custom stuff here for their initial app that you'll see in a minute. If you opt in for TypeScript, you see TypeScript's already set up. We got some alias paths, all that good stuff. So pretty much good to go.
All the good stuff,
Next
man.
config, we'll talk about that. But the most important one to look at is this app folder. So this app folder, if you remember, there was an option when I did create next app. It was like, do you want to use the app router? Or no? It was like yes or no. I said you should probably pick yes on this. This is the new version of Next.js that I was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
Right, like if we head over to the Next.js documentation here, I'm gonna pull this up. You can see here on the side there's a drop down for pages router and app router. Right, we are using the app router. This is what's new, 13. And we'll talk about that literally just a second.
if we now have to go to the documentation right now on Next 13, it say, hey man, you are quite behind, you know. Let me move here. That's right. There you got it. So you can see here now the next GS 13. This is it. All right. And again, it's quite important to understand that at the end of the day, with Next, it's just to solve their own problems. So a framework is not in the developer interest, even though that they think that they tell you to do that, but if it's on their own interest. So whatever you, at the end of the day, it is important to understand what is the problem that this stuff solves, right? So from that, you try to do or try to take the best decision as possible. So we announced at Next.js config, Next.js 13 stable lays the foundation to be dynamic without limits, app directory beta, easier, faster, less client JavaScript code. This is the app directory, where now it becomes stable, right? And here, when you define is your layout, React server components, and streaming. This particular concept here. Turbo Pack Alpha, up to 7 times faster Rust-based Webpack replacement. That's quite interesting. They're using this Turbo Pack for that. Turbo Pack here for their blog. How fast is Turbo Pack? Don't you have the repo for that? Ready to give Turbo Pack a try? Contact sale. That's interesting. Versal remote catch. Turbo Pack. Interesting. Explore Turbo Pack. Turbo build. Now I think they has become stable. So Turbo Pack is an incremental bundler optimizer for JavaScript and TypeScript, written by Rust, by the creators of Webpack and Next.js at Versal. Written in Rust by the creators of Webpack and Next.js at Versal. The secret to Turbo Pack performance is twofold: highly optimized machine code and a low-level incremental computation engine. High optimizing machine code and a low-level incremental computation engine that enable catching down to the level of individual functions. Once Turbo Pack performs a task, it never does it again. Our team has taken the lesson from 10 years of Webpack combined with the innovation in incremental computation from Turbo Repo and Google Basil, and creating an architecture ready to support the coming decades of computing. An architecture. Incremental computation and the roadmap. That's very, very interesting. So JavaScript, TypeScript, frameworks, CSS, dev server, HTML, fast refresh, static assets, import, CommonJS, ESMs, dynamic imports. But this is quite interesting. Again, this all sound interesting and lovely. Turbo Alpha Pack, new Next image, faster with native browser lazy loading. New Next fonts beta, automatic self-host fonts with zero layout shift, and improved Next link, simplify API with automatic A. Okay. So this is now the. I think this is the huge deal of that, because when you take a look now at the Next 14, All right, version 14. The minimum node version has been bumped from 16.14 to 18.17, since 16x has reached end of life. The next export command has been removed in favor of output export config please. Next/server import image response was renamed to next/o. A command is available to safely and automatically rename your imports. The next/fonts package has been fully in favor of the built-in next font. A code mode is available to safely and automatically rename your imports. The was target for Next.js has been removed. Okay. So so far this version hasn't been so dramatic. Unlike version 13, which is something that is still support here. Unlike version 13. Interesting. The minimum version of React and React DOM is now 19. Use form state has been deprecated by use action state. The use form state hook is still available in React 19, but is deprecated and it will be removed in future release. Use action state is recommended and include additional property like reading the pending state directly. Use form status not include the additional keys like data, method, and actions. If you're not using React 19, only the pending key is available. Okay. With this change here. But now in the version 15, because they were preparing for what React team was developed, they say, okay, this is what we're gonna do here. Async request API breaking change, cookie header, draft mode, layout page router default, open image. Async request API breaking change, which is one of the issues that they wants to solve at the end of the day. Runtime configuration, fetch requests. Fetch requests are no longer catched by default. To opt specific, okay, not catch. Route handlers. Get function in route handlers are no longer catched by default. To opt get methods into catching, you can use route option configurations and all that kind of stuff. Client-side router catch. And next font and bundle page route dependency, server external dependency, speed insights. Next request geolocation. That's interesting. But again, what we really care about and what is relevant for ourselves is to actually explore about this React 13, that between React 13 and 14 pretty much is, what was the major breaking change? Oh, well, one of the major breaking change is they're going to stop. They stop providing support for no 16 versions, only for 18. And I love it. So things remain quite stable, unlike unless you're using is now a Node version. All right. So yeah. App router migrations here. Migrating for create React app. Migrating from Vite. Create a root layout. Okay, it makes a lot of sense. Okay, so one of the main, so the major breaking change was they bump they bump Node version 16 to 18 because of the end of the service, EOS. So end of service of that Node version. So that's what happened, and that makes a ton of sense. All right.
But this is what we want to opt into. And the way that reflects in the repo is that there is a folder called app. This is, you actually have to have a folder called app in order to opt into this. So yeah, and then once you look in here, you'll see a couple things, something called a page, something called a layout. If you've never seen a TSX file, that's just the TypeScript version of a JSX file. That's all it is. It's nothing crazy. So if you know JSX and JavaScript, then you know how to use TSX because it's the same thing, but TypeScript. So, which, like I said, I probably won't be using any types at all. I have a CSS file and then a favicon. So the next thing I want to do is I want to start this. So to start this, like I said, we're going to use the dev command. So we can just say npm run dev to run that dev script. And you'll see that it's going to start it on a port. It tried to use 3000 in my case. I already have something running on 3000, so it went to 3001. I can just command click on this and open it up. And you should see something like this. So this is the stock Next.js scaffold app that they give you out the gate. Everyone should see the same thing, unless they change it in a later version. You're looking at this later and it doesn't look like this, but this is what you get by default on this version.
So if you say npm run dev, but we need to actually get into that. npm run dev, and then when we click here, we are actually running. Why we are running that version? Why we are running is that that was quite interesting because I tell them explicitly to install that version, and then he said no, this is the version that we're going to install. And to me it's like no, I didn't tell you to install that version. I didn't tell you to install that version. And yeah, I didn't tell you to install that version. Definitely didn't tell you to install that version. What in the F is... Okay, here we go.
Now it's going to give you this prompt of like different configurations.
Yeah, that is annoying. That is annoying.
Let's just dive right into the most craziest. I think it's important to talk about the history of Next.js and kind of how that one kind of reminds me of the jQuery days. All right, everyone, how's it going? Highly recommend using this to as a reference for the code that we'll be writing. If you feel like you might be falling behind, if you just want to look ahead, if however you want to reference it, it's there. It's always going to be there. So take a look at it. I'll be doing everything from scratch in this course, and I'll probably be doing it very similar to what's in the repo, but not exactly one for one, because I'm just random and I just do things differently every time I write code. Like, I don't remember any of this stuff. I just do it again. So that's kind of how my style is. But yeah, so the other thing I just want to talk about is like what I think you would need to know to get the best from this course. So one, having a good understanding of Node.js. So that doesn't mean you need to be an expert at it, but maybe if you've taken an intro course to Node.js, that's probably good enough. Or if you just built a Hello World app in Node.js, that's probably good enough. That also includes if you've ever built any front-end app that uses a framework like React or Vue or Svelte, because they all use build tools that are based off Node.js. So that's probably also good enough. And then obviously you need to know JavaScript. I'll be using TypeScript in the course. You do not need to know TypeScript. All the types are optional, and I never use them, so you won't even notice it. But I'm just using TypeScript out of the box because it's just easier to work with these days. And then the last thing is, I would say, probably a decent understanding on the difference between like servers and clients and just basic networking with HTTP and kind of how that works. Like, maybe to the point of like, let's just dive right into the most crazy. Now that we're all, if you know JSX and JavaScript, that you.
Cache, server, and static, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Let me actually delete this in our model here. Right. Oh, it's blazing fast. And now inside of here, and say, hey, npm install. All of these dependencies that I need to. All right, and you say, hey, npm run dev, which is ready there. It is compiled. I want to open up this, okay, and then you got is this. All right. Okay.
You know how to use TSX because it's the same thing, but you should see something like this. So this is the stock Next.js scaffold app that they give you out the gate. Everyone should see the same thing unless they change it in a later version and you're looking at this later and it doesn't look like this, but this is what you get by default on this version. And yeah, it's pretty cool. And everything here just kind of links to their documentation so you can check it out. But it's a great starting point. One last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new file on the root, call it .prettierrc. And the reason I'm doing this is because I want to be able to hit save and have everything be auto-formatted with ESLint and Prettier. And Prettier won't work unless you have a Prettier configuration on your root. And I also like to have my single quotes. I hate double quotes. And I also don't like semicolons, so I'm turning those off. You don't have to have this. This is only because my VS Code is looking for this. Ever seen a TSX file? That's just, and we are using the app route. You can see here on the thing, I want to be able to hit save and have everything be auto-formatted with ESLint and Prettier. And Prettier won't work unless you have a Prettier configuration on your root. And I also like to have my single quotes. I hate double quotes. And I also don't like semicolons, so I'm turning those off. You don't have to have this. This is only because my VS Code is looking for this. My Prettier ESLint plugins inside my VS Code are looking for this file in order for it to work. Yours might be set up differently, so you can add it. It won't change the functionality or anything on your app. It just allows me to get formatting when I hit save, which is something that I cannot live without at this point. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about, now that we're all experts on it, it won't change the functionality.
Okay, you define some sort of Prettier configuration here. Let me actually say, hey, touch, Prettier. But I think this is the Prettier source. Exactly. So by the time I open up this and say, hey, I want to single quote to true, right? And the other is semi-true.
Or anything on your app, it just allows me to get formatting when I hit save, which is something that I cannot. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, let's talk about the routing basics. So Next.js, like I said, is a React-based framework, but also, like I said, React doesn't have any routing associated with it at all. You kind of gotta go find your own. So who here has built a React app where they had to like go find their own router for React? All right, what'd you end up using?
React Router.
React Router, yeah. Anyone had any other luck with any other frameworks or any other libraries for routing?
Abusing anchor tags.
Or just using anchor tags, yeah.
Abusing.
Yeah, abusing it, yeah. I think there's another one called like Reach Router. I'm not sure how popular that one is,
tag?
but I think it's also made from the same people who made React Router as well. I don't know. But like even that alone is just enough to be like, oh, now I gotta go research all these routing libraries to see which one's the best and the most updated, and then learn that thing. Well, Next.js as a framework is really just about combining a bunch of conventions that do things for you automatically where it's supposed to feel magical. Some people like that magical feeling. Some people don't like that magical feeling. I personally like the magical feeling when I know what it's doing and I know what the alternative is.
Completely, man.
One of the magical things that they do is that they just hook up the router for you. So you don't have to go figure out and download or even configure a router. You just make files and folders and it's done. So how does that work? Well, it's all based off the file system and the structure inside of our app directory. So basically every single folder that you make in the app directory is going to correspond to a different segment in your router for your app. So an example would be if we had, /app and then we had /dashboard and then /settings, that's going to make a route for our website.com/dashboard/settings. And then to actually create a page that loads up on that segment, all we have to do is create a page component. So a page.js or page JSX or page TSX, just a page. It has to be called page. If you've used a previous version of Next, this wasn't the case. So if you used the pages directory, any file that you made in a folder was going to be that route. So that's not the case here. In this case, you actually specifically have to call it page in order for it to be a page in that segment. So let's check that out. We already have one. If you look in the app directory, there's a page right on the root. So seeing how this page file is on the root, that means its path is just /. So this will be the home page, right? And we couldn't make another page TSX or JSX or JS in this folder because we couldn't have two home pages and we couldn't have two files with the same names here. So you kind of got to think through how you're working through those conflicts. But let's say we want to make another route here. So let's make a new folder and we'll call it, docs, because we're going to have a docs section where we talk about the docs for our API. So I can say docs, and then I can go in here and then I can say page.tsx. And all I have to do is just export a component that returns some JSX, right? So I'm just going to say const docs page. And I'm just going to make sure that's a default export. Right? And then inside of here, I'm just going to return, whoa, not here. Oops. Inside of here, I'm just going to return a div that just says docs page. Right? So now we have our docs page. And now, without having to stop or start anything, I can go right into the browser.
Exactly. This is when you
go
can
into
find
our
your
app.
blog or your dashboard.
I can say docs,
which is a subtree,
and I get my docs page.
routes, and that kind of thing.
And that's all I had to do to make a new route. Very simple, very easy.
I really
didn't have to research a router, didn't have to learn the router, didn't have to install the router, set it up. I just made a new file, a new folder, and a new file. That was
What
it.
is the problem that it solved?
It's free.
How do I get here?
Any questions on that?
Can I just see the code for that real quick?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So I made a new folder called docs on the root of the app folder, and then I made a page TSX in that, and it's just a component that returns a div.
Is there a labeling convention for capitalizing the docs page?
Yeah, so for the most part, you want to probably capitalize any component that's a page, I would say. That's usually the convention. And in fact, if you have a component that using for UI and you don't capitalize it and you try to bring it in, you will get an error from React saying this is not a real component. So because it can't tell if it's an element or a component. But in the case of this, it's just a convention. I don't think, obviously Next.js doesn't care about it. But yeah, you'll see that most of the time of just being capitalizing your components. And in fact, in my case, I capitalize pretty much every component that I have just because I don't want to run into any issues from something like Next.js or some future version of React. I also am very lazy, and sometimes I make components the same name as elements, and all elements are lowercase, so I can just avoid that collision by just making mine uppercase, like a component called image. Well, you don't want a lowercase image component, because then what about the image tag that is also img? So I just uppercase everything. Any other questions? Cool. Yeah, and so that's pretty much how you would make a route. It's basically free, but it does get more advanced than that. So with the newest version of Next.js, we have really cool features in the routing that allow us to do some exciting stuff. One of the things is something called route grouping. So let's just demonstrate what route grouping is. So you can. It's better just to demonstrate than to talk about it because it's kind of cool. So route grouping is basically a way for you to combine a bunch of routes that live in a similar place. Imagine you have a dashboard that has a very specific layout. It has navigation on the left, some navigation on the top, and then the content, right? And then within that dashboard, there's 30 pages, right? Okay, they all have a very similar layout, so you kind of want them grouped underneath the same segment. But let's say you don't want to put /dashboard in your URL. You don't want all those routes that live in the dashboard to have /dashboard in the URL. You don't want the URL to be affected by them being grouped together. Because what you would normally do is you would just make a new folder and call it
Dashboard,
dashboard,
loaded
right? And then you would just put all your stuff in here, and that's totally
Interesting.
fine. But this would make a ourwebsite.com/dashboard/the rest of our routes. I don't want that, but I do want them to be grouped together and have that common layout. And we'll talk about layouts later. So what I can do is I can actually just wrap this in a parentheses like this. And now I get the same benefit of any route that I put in here that's going to have the exact same layout shared across them, but it won't affect the of any route that I put in here that's going to have the exact same layout shared across them, but it won't affect the URL. So let's give it a shot. So the one thing that you have to think about when you do these route groupings is because this segment is not going to be part of the URL. That means if I go and I make a page.tsx in here, what is the actual route for this page? If this is ignored in the URL, so then what would be the route for this page? Anyone want to guess?
The root.
It would just be home, but I already have one, right? So now I have a collision, right? And this is something you have to think about because this is ignored. This will be home now, but I already have a home. So which one's going to render? Whichever one Next.js resolves to. Or actually, I think it will actually just throw an error. Let's see. Dashboard
Let's see how the result.
page. I think Next.js is smart enough to be like, go to just home, and you can see it resolved to the one that was on the root, right? It just went there instead of trying to go here. Now if I try to go to /dashboard, we get a 4 for it, right? Because this segment doesn't exist in the URL. So you can't even go to this page. It's not like you just made a page for nothing. So to avoid that, typically what you'll have inside of a folder that's grouped are other folders to create real segments, right? So you might have dashboard here, but then inside of dashboard, you might have something like an actual folder with no parentheses on it. It's like
You can
settings,
have the note found
right?
as
And then
well.
settings might have a page
That's
inside of
not
it,
found.
like so. And now I can change this from dashboard page to settings page.
Segment. Exactly, within the route segment.
And now I should be able to route to
Follow the error.
/settings
errors for
and then get this page, right? So now if I go to /settings, I'm on the settings page. Okay. So again, why would we want to do this? Well, it has something to do with layouts. I'm going to briefly talk about layouts, but we have a whole thing where we talk about layouts. But basically layouts are, if you've ever built any app in React, you've probably made some of these. It's just like, oh, I have some common UI that I want a lot of these pages to share. So I'm going to like wrap them around these pages. That's basically what layouts is, but you don't have to do it yourself. All you have to do is just make a layout file. So if I go into the dashboard folder and make a layout there, every single page that's on the level or below will share that layout. And that's why you would do group folders, is that like, I want everything in this folder to have the exact same layout without affecting the URL. If I do want it to affect the URL, then I would just get rid of the parentheses. That's basically it. That's route grouping.
If there's a layout and a page file inside of a
folder.
route group, yeah. It'll render the page and then render the layout inside of that.
Exactly. If there's a layout next to a page, the page gets rendered in the layout, always. Every page on the same level or below a layout gets rendered in that layout. And we'll talk more about layouts because you can also nest layouts, and it gets pretty crazy.
Of a route
but
setting
yeah,
and rendering a specific hierarchy.
that's that. Any
Layout,
questions on that?
template. Node.js, React,
Okay, cool. So let's make the routes for our app. So for our app,
Node.js,
we're going to have,
suspense
here's kind of the layout here.
Phone.js, React error boundary.
We're going to have basically our dashboard, which is going to be route grouped. So we're not going to have it be part of the URL. Don't worry about this API thing. We'll talk about that in a little bit. And then we have this docs folder here with what's crazy thing. We'll talk about that crazy thing in a minute. So let's kind of set that up right now. So we already have our dashboard, and inside of our dashboard, we need a to-dos folder where we have our page. So let's do that. So I'm going to change the settings from settings. I'm going to rename it to to-dos. I don't know why I copied that whole thing. I got to write it all over again. Dashboard. Okay. Why did it show it like that? That was weird. They should just stop showing me the shortcut. Just show me the whole thing. Let's call this to-dos. There we go.
Routing patterns, parallel routing setting.
There we go. And then we have our page in there. And then our doc, we have our page in there. So far so good. We have everything that we need. We're able to route to /to-dos. We're able to route to docs, and we're able to route to the page. So we can just verify all of that. I'm going to go to home. Should be able to route there. Should be able to route to /to-dos, which just say settings, and then we should be able to route to /docs, which says docs.
Configure, testing with vtest. You set up with vtest, and deploying and upgrading that.
Can you have multiple pages in a folder?
You cannot have multiple pages in a folder because URLs are unique. So you have to think about the segment. So if you had you think about it like this, let's say I wanted to put another page inside.
So that'll be all for this video. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.